So I bet you're dying to know what is the next stage. So this is mid-stage, I'm going to call it. My estimate is that about 5 to 10% of people, of meditators, reach mid-stage, which is quite a damning statistic, really. These aren't hard facts, these are kind of estimates. But you can decide, look around you and see, and think to your own experience and see, what do you think? The core shift at the mid-stage is that thoughts lose their authority over you. They are seen as appearances, not truths. And that's what I alluded to just a few minutes ago. So the mid-stage, your identity is starting to dissolve, basically, because as soon as your thoughts lose authority, that's another way of saying that the main mechanism by which your sense of identity, your sense of self, your sense of being who you are, not in a psychological way, but in a moment-to-moment sense, is thoughts. And that is starting to dissolve, and they're starting to lose their solidity. And so your identity is going to start dissolving, absolutely. This little shift, well, it's not a little shift at all, but this one shift right here explains a lot of what happens at the mid-stage. Some changes you will notice is that your emotions arise, but they resolve faster. They don't have this clinging sense to them. You don't feel the need to run away from them. That's why they resolve, because when there's no resistance behind them, they don't crystallize and solidify in your experience, and so they can just dissolve like all experience does, because it's essentially impermanent. That's getting ahead of ourselves though. And this, I think, is because when you've meditated for long enough, you've basically practiced sitting with yourself, with your body, your mind, for so long that you learn to stop resisting, you learn to stop putting barriers up, you learn to stop fighting with what's happening in your mind and body. And so emotions are just part of that. This is a natural extension of your meditation skills. Now, obviously, it depends on the type of meditation you're doing, but, as a general thing, you're always just sitting with your mind and body. And any good meditation technique will teach you to stop resisting what you're experiencing. There's less storytelling and less evaluation. What I mean by this is that you don't build like a huge story around your meditation so much. It's more just something you do. It's not part of this narrative that you're going to like grow into some sage or you're going to become awakened one day. That's still there, but not so much. You're not evaluating the meditation. You're not evaluating so much your mind and body all the time. You're not trying to feel good all the time. You're not trying to use meditation as a means to an end. You're more just doing it for the sake of doing it. Meditation bleeds into daily life. So no longer is it this separate activity that you do for 15, 20, 30 minutes or however long. It's not that it's fully integrated, but it's there. It's like you can call on it. You can bring up your meditation skills. You can notice when you're getting lost in thought. You notice when your emotions are carrying you away. You notice when you're, say, in a social situation, and instead of enjoying it, you're lost in your mind and all your own inner stuff. And you can just anchor yourself in your senses more and be in the present. These things. So it's not like a complete rewiring of your daily life, but it's starting to really influence it. And you're going to really start noticing how important meditation is at this point. And it's going to be like quite shocking actually to see the contrast. There's a greater tolerance for discomfort. Now this is just, if you look at the scientific studies on meditation, this is one of the main things they've picked up on through people who've done sort of 1,000+ hours of meditation, is that their relationship to pain, physical pain and emotional discomfort really changes on quite a fundamental level. And you will notice this And again, it's really because you're learning not to resist your experience. And you'll learn that a lot of the time the pain that we feel is not really the raw sensation of pain. It's actually our own psychological interpretation of the pain and how we add on to it and how we multiply it through by doing that. And so this goes hand in hand with the ability to tolerate emotions as well. The shift in identity at the mid-stage is that the self becomes partially transparent, so you can start to see how your body and your mental images and your thoughts come together to create the sense that you are who you are. And when you start to notice that, you start to realize that the self is not really a thing. It's a pattern that appears in consciousness. Now, this isn't fully present and it's not fully automatic yet, but it's starting. We're getting there. You're starting to realize that all these different components of the self are really rather. They have no real substance to them, and therefore your self has no real substance to it. The mid-stage can be rather destabilizing because ultimately, if we zoom out, you're going from just ordinary perception, ordinary identification with the self, ordinary subject-object consciousness to awakened consciousness, shall we say. And in that process, of course, there's a lot of positive symptoms, shall we say, but there's negative symptoms. It's like a death, and it's a rewiring of your nervous system, of your perceptual circuits and all the rest of it. Spiritual performance becomes embarrassing, so you start to realize that the identity of being a meditator is actually very counterproductive and doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint that humans will take pretty much anything and make an identity out of it. But from the practical point of view of, well, if I want to progress with my meditation, you realize that making an identity out of it is actually the opposite of what you should be doing. The actual real path is to see through your identity and to realize that there is no one meditating. There is no fixed self. There is no permanent thing that you call you, and therefore, how can you even make an identity out of it? How can you give yourself a name? How can you wear clothes? How can you advertise your meditator identity? Because doing all that is really just a distraction. However, the sense that you are approaching awakening remains. So on one hand, you can say that awakening goes from being this sort of lofty project to being, okay, this is doable now, I'm getting there, right? And ultimately this is an illusion, but at the mid stage, you still kind of externalize awakening, and you make it into a conceptual. You build it into a conceptual framework and hold it in that way, and it's only when you finally realize that awakening itself is a concept, and that you are externalizing everything. That is really what brings awakening anyway. There's often a grief at this stage and a loss of your ambition, because you've gone from being the sort of upstart, like an ambitious upstart, with all this energy and sort of motivation to meditate and to broadcast it and all the rest of it, to just realizing to some degree that there is no permanent self, to realizing that spiritual identity is is a fiction or it's a distraction, that it's a story, to realizing that your thoughts are just appearances. It's less sexy, but it's also a lot deeper, and it's much more connected to right now and what is actually happening right now, which is just that your experience is occurring. Whereas the early stage is still kind of in fantasy land, really. It's spiritual, conceptual fantasy land.